blue rain from a clear sky, our world a cube of sunlight. But to the south, the violet admonition of thunder. We are almost at the end of the gauntlet, so I thought it was time to bust out the good lighting. Kia ora koutou, I am the Casual Kiwi, and this is Amorphage Lair of Darkness that Silent has been using in the gauntlet. This deck was made, of course, for the gauntlet, which took place on December 11th, 2020. So I'm not sure exactly when this video will be finally going up. Hopefully it will have given the Discord a little bit of time to prepare for whatever happens in the wake of the final duel between Silent and I. And in any case, if there's any cards here that I feel might potentially face ban or limits in the future that I'm particularly worried about, I will point those out when we get to them. So without further ado, welcome to the updated Amorphage Lair of Darkness profile. And we will start with the monsters. So first up, you're running 2 copies of Amorphage Goliath. This can be a brick, but is incredibly powerful if you are able to get out as the largest of the main deck Amorphages. It is a level 8, which means it pairs really well with your Diabolos plays, as well as being a dragon, of course, like all the Amorphages. The Amorphages being in many ways monsters that have been transformed from ordinary creatures into dragons by dark magic. All of the Amorphages have a pendulum effect, which becomes active when you have an Amorphage monster on the field, and they also have a monster effect, which usually prevents special summoning from the extra deck. The bigger Amorphages, the ones you have to tribute summon or special summon, are active however you get them onto the field. They prevent extra deck summoning. For the one low level Amorphage that Silent plays in this deck, that requires it to either be set first or to be pendulum summoned to get that monster effect. As for the pendulum effect for Amorphage Goliath, it means that any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead, unless it is an Amorphage card. So this can be a really powerful floodgate option if you need it. The second Amorphage is Amorphage Sloth. Again, 2 copies. This had to be proxied in the original deck profile. Sure there'll be a link to that. This one was very difficult to get hands on at the time, as it was very popular in Endymion decks. Its pendulum effect prevents the adding of cards from deck to hand except for Amorphage cards, which can pair very well with Amorphage Infection that allows you to search other Amorphages. It's a level 5, which means it only needs 1 tribute to bring it out, whereas Goliath requires 2. And in general it's a very good backup option, though bear in mind you cannot summon it off Return of the Dragon Lords. The final Amorphage monster we play is Amorphage Pride. Now I believe this was a tech choice of Silence because a lot of my decks do rely on burn damage effects, and this one prevents effect damage when it's in the pendulum scale. And as stated before, if it is to use its monster extra deck locking out effect, it must be flip summoned or pendulum summoned. So that's it for the Amorphage monsters in the deck. Next up, we're running a Lair of Darkness package, hence the Lair in Amorphage Lair. 3 copies of Ahrima, and also 2 copies of Darkest Diabolos, Lord of the Lair. Now, a lot of people might say, well, Kiwi, Silent, what are you guys thinking? Why are you running Amorphages with Lair of Darkness? You should know that Amorphages, in order to remain in the pendulum zone, require a monster to be tributed each turn. But that is a cost that cannot be exploited by Lair of Darkness to allow you to tribute your opponent's monster for cost to keep the Amorphages on the field. The reason why Lair goes so well with Amorphages is that every time you have to tribute off a monster for an Amorphage in the Pendulum Zone's effect, Lair of Darkness will give you a token in the end phase, and then for future turns you can tribute the token instead of having to tribute an additional monster. Also, along with cards like the Searcher or Amorphage Infection, which we'll cover later, if you tribute off a dark monster by an Amorphage's effect, you might be able to special summon Darkest Diabolos as well as get a search for an Amorphage monster. So you build up a lot of advantage very quickly by combining these two archetypes. You also have a lot of synergy in the same sort of cards that can bring out and protect. Goliath can also bring out and protect Darkest Diabolos, mostly Return of the Dragon Lords. And this provides an additional degree of synergy in that the two parts of the engine don't get in each other's way. So that's it for the Monster Lair of Darkness package that we are running in this deck. We are also running one copy of Dragon Core Hexer. Now this is a normal monster and a tuner, which happens to be a dragon and level 8. So where this is particularly useful is that this gives the deck access to Ultima Zolkin Bishbalkin, which is an incredibly powerful synchro monster, which you would have seen Silent use in the Gauntlet to establish some pretty crazy boards with. It summons tokens to both players' fields, and Dragon Core Hexer is the way we get there. The vanilla text for this card reads, "Many years of dragon slaying have bathed this huntress in countless amounts of blood. Each drop gave her more power, but at a terrible price, as her cursed body now spreads the dragon taint like an epidemic. No village will take her in, and she no longer even remembers what inspired her crusade in the first place." It's probably one of the most tragic monster texts in the entire game, and I can definitely see why Silent played this. We have finally, for the monsters, running an Squire package. So 3 copies of Edea, the Heavenly Squire, as well as 2 copies of Eidos, the Underworld Squire. So this does also lock you out of extra deck summoning, similar to the Amorphages, but the advantage with these is that it's very easy to get them out of the deck. We run a lot of options to get into them, and being able to get into easy tribute summons just allows us to get a lot more advantage on the board. Worst case scenario for this deck, you can just summon a lot of beat sticks like Goliath and Diabolos, and you don't need the extra deck to run an opponent over. So this is a very good package to use. So that's it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the spell and trap lineup. So first off, as I guess I've been foreshadowing, Return of the Dragon Lords is a 3-of that we play that allows you to special summon a level 7 or 8 dragon from your graveyard. It also comes with protection from destruction for your dragon type monsters. You can banish this from the graveyard instead of having a dragon type monster on your field destroyed by battle or card effects. Can be very handy in the pinch. We didn't see much of it in the Gauntlet, but it is still nevertheless a good inclusion in a deck like this. They also run 3 copies of Enemy Controller. Now, Enemy Controller is a card that personally I think Silent has this in as a placeholder. This is probably where Super Poly would be in this deck if it was not in the side. But enemy controller works very well with Lair of Darkness because you can tribute an opponent's monster and then take control of another one of their monsters. It also has an effect that allows for the switching to defense position, which does not involve a tribute. But where this is surprisingly helpful is potentially against things like my Time Lords, where managing to battle is quite critical to the strategy. So enemy controller is a really interesting pick in this deck. Again, shame we didn't get to see more of it, but it is definitely a cool choice when you have access to Lair of Darkness in the deck. Now we also run 3 copies of Monster Gate as well as 1 copy of Reasoning. Now, depending on the meta, the numbers of these cards are always fluctuating. One doesn't have to be psychic or have access to the Shadow Realm to know that these cards are never a guarantee. It's possible that, you could have all sorts of things happen in the future, just as a crazy example, Reasoning could go back to 3, in which case you'd play far more copies of Reasoning. It's probably a much more powerful option than Monster Gate, as nothing has to be tributed, and you don't have to rely on Lair of Darkness to get full advantage out of this card. Monster Gate could be limited or banned, in which case again that would make things quite difficult. In the original profile for this, I believe it was 1 copy of Monster Gate, 1 copy of Reasoning. These are power cards. They're great to have but not necessary. They allow for some incredibly strong plays to really get your board state rolling, but they are not necessary. Reasoning is a particularly finicky one because the Amorphages are all different levels, which means that calling one particular number is not a guarantee you'll actually hit it. Probably the best call is 8, because you don't want your opponent special summoning Diabolos or Goliath out of their deck for free. But yeah, I have to be very careful with cards like this because you never know when Silent might be interfering with what I'm going to say. I do try to avoid being manipulated when it comes to the Gauntlet duels, but I do have to second guess myself sometimes. So there are those, and then we move into the 2-ofs. So we have 2 copies of Amorphage Infection. Again, this can be a really powerful additional card to have on board. It's not a starter, but it does allow you to extend quite well. It boosts all your Amorphage's attack points based on how many Amorphage cards are on the field. That includes itself and the Amorphage monster, which is really good. And if any of your monsters are tributed or destroyed, you get to search an Amorphage monster. Now, this is once per turn, but it's very easy to trigger this off when you have things like Lair of Darkness and you have the Amorphage cards in the pendulum zone which need to tribute for cost. So this helps you recoup advantage, and Lair of Darkness helps you get even more advantage on board. So again, I hope more people do pick up Amorphage Lair of Darkness and give this a try for themselves. Again, we only played it 2 because it is more of an extender and we don't want to brick with them. Same with trade-in. This is a great way to get your Goliaths and Diabolos in the graveyard to make them a bit more live. Draw 2 cards, not too much to explain there. 2 copies of Dragon Shrine. Now again, this is a once per turn, so that's why I imagine Silent's only running it at 2. But it allows you to send a dragon to the graveyard, and if it's a normal monster, you can send an additional dragon monster to the graveyard. So this can be huge with Dragon Core Hexer. You send Dragon Core Hexer, then you send Diabolos, you special summon them both back and make Bish Balkan, or Hope Harbinger, which we did see. Cool to see that card get summoned even under the circumstances. And so yeah, this is a really powerful Foolish Burial for a dragon deck. Great to have in there. We then have 2 copies of Lair of Darkness. Now, I was sure that Silent had decided that actually running Lair of Darkness at 3 was the better play. But I think the reason that it's at 2 here is because Silent also runs 1 copy of Dragon Ravine, which is an additional Foolish Burial for dragons, so that's 3 field spells in the deck, and Lair of Darkness is searchable with Ahrima, which means that you've still got essentially 5 copies of Lair of Darkness in the deck. Yeah, again, its ability to tribute off opponents' monsters gets around a lot of other protections. It can even work quite well to keep getting advantage into things like skill drain, which can be very handy in a pinch. Lair of Darkness, non-easy card to deal with, definitely one of the major threats that I've had to look out for throughout the Gauntlet. So that's it for the field spells. Then 1 copy of Foolish Burial, 1 copy of Monster Reborn, 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army, and 1 copy of 1/1. So Foolish Burial, generic way to send things to the graveyard, can be super helpful. Monster Reborn, generic way to bring things back. Doesn't just work on level 8 dragons. It's better than Return of the Dragon Lords, but unfortunately we only have it at 1. Reinforcement of the Army is a way to get to your Eidos and Edea plays. 1/1, same story. Gets you to your Eidos and Edea plays and also dumps a monster to the graveyard. So dumping that monster to the graveyard can allow for additional combos. And yeah, 1/1 is a fantastic extender. So that's it for the spells. Now, the original version of this deck profile had only spells and monsters in it, which is very unusual for both Amorphage decks and Lair decks in general. This version does, however, contain 1 card, which is a trap. And again, this card could be banned. This card could come back to 3 if we're looking at, trends in the OCG. Skill Drain is really debilitating for my decks to deal with in particular. So there's a pretty hard counter to everything except Time Lock. But this card also brings out a lot of potential in the deck because some of your plays do get cut off by the Amorphage monsters. I mean, you can't go into the extra deck, and Skill Drain will turn off those effects. So you can potentially do things there. In the alternative as well, this just makes your beat sticks even harder to out. And I think Silent really thought she had me on the ropes there with that game too, and it was very lucky that I had known her so well. So that's it for the main deck, and with that we'll move on to the extra. Okay, so moving on to the extra deck, we run a lot of cards that help mostly with Bishbalkan, because again, with this being an Amorphage deck, you're not going into the extra deck too often. The extra deck bolsters your plays, gets you out of tricky spots, but it is not the go-to strategy. So for Link monsters, we'll begin with the Link ones of a copy of Link Spider and a copy of Link Haribo. These are helpful for Bishbalkan plays, work well with the Zolk'humaya tokens. Then we have Beat Cop from the Underworld and Wee Witch's Apprentice. Again, both of these work well with Lair of Darkness. Can be used to help protect Lair of Darkness in the case of Beat Cop, or strengthen your dark monsters with Wee Witch's Apprentice. Interesting way potentially Wee Witch could be used is if you can get that out in the field and then summon a Goliath with your infections up. You can get Goliath to an insane amount of attack points, which can be dangerous for any deck to deal with, especially if you combine that with Skill Drain or any other removal options you might have because of Lair. So very potentially powerful Link 2. We then have Proxy Dragon, again for more Bishbalkan plays. A Nightmare package of Nightmare Phoenix, Nightmare Cerberus, and Nightmare Unicorn. Silent plays this in a lot of her decks, and we're yet to see it get utilized. but there is always the potential that these could be quite devastating, especially with Silent's final deck. So we'll have to see if these do end up getting some action in the Gauntlet after all. Finally, for the Link boss monsters, we have Borolo Dragon and Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess. I think both of these are again meant to target my weak points. Stopping negating effects is pretty powerful in general, but Borolo Dragon is a very proven out to Time Lords. Taking control of a Time Lord and then removing it before it can return to my side of the field can be very devastating. I'm glad I haven't had to face down Borolo Dragon yet, but it's good to know it's in the mix. Again, very dangerous card to deal with, and Appaloosa as well. So these boss monsters are nothing to scoff at, and you get these out plus Goliath. That becomes a very crazy board, and I'm very lucky I did not lose that game when Silent got out that card. So that's it for the Link monsters. We then have number 38, Hope Harbinger, Dragon Titanic Galaxy, and Phantasmal Lord Ultimal Bish Balkan. So the Synchro and the XC in the deck. You'll notice there is no Super Dreadnought, Rail Cannon, Gustav Max in here. I think that confirms that the final cards in Silent's side deck must be 2 copies of Ash Blossom and a copy of Super Dreadnought, Rail Cannon, Gustav Max, which means whenever I break out, pure Time Lords with that Gustav Max OTK, Silent always has access to a Rail Cannon Ghost Reaper target, which I think is a very clever move, considering how dangerous that combo can be for OTKing. Hope Harbinger is just a generically good rank 8, and I imagine a good alternative if the Bish Balkan play doesn't make sense. Again, incredibly powerful card, and do some crazy things with Bish Balkan, and I'm very lucky to have survived an encounter with it. Again, it could have all ended last match for the Gauntlet. It could have been the end of the road, so that's it for the Synchros and the XZs. All that is left is the fusions. So we have Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. We have Phantasm Emperor Trilojig. And of course we have the first Dark Lord. I don't know if anyone has heard the myth of the Morningstar Duelist, but no, it's not relevant right now. I'm sure of it. Again, he couldn't have known about that unless surely not. Anyway, Starving Venom Fusion Dragon is a very common super poly target, just needs 2 dark, so great for when Lair of Darkness on the field. Trilog and the first Dark Lord are a bit less common, but under Lair, the first Dark Lord turning all dark monsters into fairies means that it's a very powerful way to get rid of my entire board. It's happened more than once in the Gauntlet and has been devastating every single time. Gosh, keeps just messing me up, that card. Phantasm Emperor Trilog is a new one to see. It was played in the manga by Eve. Interestingly, it requires 3 level 10 monsters. Now, it's unlikely that I'll end up in a situation where I'm able to get out 3 fairy, 3 level 10 Time Lords. I think 3 fairies on the board is a bit more common, but this doesn't require Lair of Darkness, which means that it's a way Super Poly can be live without Lair being on the field, which is very concerning. Also knowing that Silent is playing Lair of Darkness Dark Lord as her final deck. This card can also be used in combination with her level 10s and mine, which means it'll be a lot more live for the finale of the Gauntlet. So that's one in particular I need to be worried about. Okay. So this is the end of the Amorphage Lair of Darkness profile. I'm probably going to record a pure Time Lord deck profile soon after this, just because I might not get a chance after the finale of the Gauntlet, depending on whether I'm able to save Silent or not and how things end there. So I want to get that out of the way. And so I'll have more to say in that profile, so stay tuned. But yeah, Amorphage Lair of Darkness. Very curious. Yeah, very curious what people thought of how the deck performed. I hope it's shown that Amorphages and Lair of Darkness can have a lot of synergy. It's definitely a deck that a lot of people sleep on. And I would love to see Amorphages really break back into the competitive scene with some sort of crazy Lair of Darkness combination. Again, that might be sky-high thinking, but sometimes in the darkest times you've got to think of some things that give you hope. So yeah, before we go to the elimination of this deck, I'm glad to share it with you guys one final time. So that's it for Amorphage Lair of Darkness. Ngā mihi, good night.